Have you ever stopped to wonder who is actually controlling the information you consume every single day? I mean, it's so easy to just think of the news as a direct reflection of reality. But behind every headline you read, every broadcast you watch, and every article you scroll past, there is an invisible framework working behind the scenes dictating exactly what you see, and maybe more importantly, what gets left in the dark. So today's explainer is a journey to decode those exact forces. We're going to uncover the unseen theories that have governed the press for centuries and honestly fundamentally shape how we perceive the entire world.
All right, let's dive right in. Here's our roadmap for today. First, power in the press. Second, authoritarian, state elite control. Third, libertarian, unrestricted free press. Fourth, Soviet communist, the working class. And finally, social responsibility, freedom with duty.
Starting right off with Part 1, Power and the Press, and how history shaped media control. You see, to really wrap our heads around these models, we have to recognize that these frameworks didn't just magically appear overnight, right? They evolved from this centuries-long, historical tug-of-war between absolute state control and our fundamental human desire for freedom of expression. Our journey today is going to move chronologically, so we're starting way back with the strict, top-down control of early monarchies and feudal lords in the 16th century. Then we'll push forward into the disruptive rise of Marxist ideology in the 19th century, and finally we'll land in 1947, which is when modern democracies basically had to sit down and figure out a completely new compromise for the press.
Which brings us to Section 2, authoritarian or state elite control.
Now, this very first historical framework actually took root in 16th and 17th century England. This was a time when the monarchy exerted incredibly heavy control over the media through this system of strict permissions and licenses. Under the authoritarian theory, all forms of communication operate under the stringent oversight of a governing elite. And the rationale here is very specific. It's to safeguard what they consider a divinely sanctioned social order. So, under this model, governments perceive mass media strictly as a tool to advance their own objectives. The press is essentially just a vehicle for propaganda on behalf of the ruling party. It's designed to inform the public of only what the elite deem necessary.
Now, you might be thinking, okay, the government must literally own everything in this system, right? Well, actually, scratch that. It's not always the case. Typically, print media is predominantly privately owned, while things like broadcast and cinema are kept under tight government lock and key. But here is the massive catch. Preemptive censorship is legally enforced across the board. So the press might technically be private on paper, but they have absolutely zero freedom to critique governmental policies. Any divergence from the official line or any criticism of authority whatsoever can lead straight to criminal prosecution.
Moving right along to Section 3, libertarian or unrestricted free press.
History is basically just one big series of actions and reactions. So following a massive and, let's be honest, sometimes violent pushback against that strict feudal control, which was really sparked by the Protestant Reformation in 16th century Europe, people began demanding personal freedom in their thoughts and beliefs. And that brings us to the libertarian theory, which you might also hear called the free press theory. In super sharp contrast to the authoritarian model, here the media enjoys complete, absolute freedom from government oversight. The whole underlying philosophy is that if you remove constraints on communication, rational individuals will pursue the truth, engage in healthy public discourse, and ultimately discover what is right. This theory champions private ownership and essentially positions the media as this skeptical watchdog whose entire job is to keep a really close eye on the government and hold it accountable.
This ultimate libertarian ideal is absolutely nailed by the First Amendment to the American Constitution, which firmly states that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. The United States was among the very first pioneering nations to embrace these principles, viewing free expression as a natural, fundamental right. Another fantastic example is Finland. Their constitution strictly guarantees access to information, which has led it to be ranked as having the freest press in the entire world.
But let's take a step back and look at the reality of how this actually plays out. The crucial thing to remember here is that even in the most robust libertarian systems, freedom is never 100% absolute. To protect other essential human rights, boundaries do still exist. For instance, defamation laws are there to protect reputations, and regulations against obscenity or false advertising absolutely still apply. On top of that, sedition laws can restrict publications, and during times of war or national emergency, this highly cherished press freedom is frequently and legally curtailed by the state.
Next up, Section 4, Soviet communist and the working class.
So jumping forward a bit chronologically to the late 19th century, industrialization and urbanization were rapidly, totally changing society. Karl Marx started formulating ideas about material resources and class struggles, and that spawned an entirely different approach to media structure, which was later modified by Lenin and Stalin. This is the Soviet communist theory.
Now, unlike the libertarian model that is terrified of state control, this framework completely embraces it. The state possesses absolute authority to regulate all forms of mass media. But, and this is key, the stated goal is entirely different from those authoritarian elites we talked about earlier. The goal here is to unify the populace and uplift the working class. To achieve this egalitarian social order, this framework literally eliminates private ownership of the press completely. The media's role is strictly to educate, motivate, and actively drive positive societal transformation.
If we put these two highly controlled systems side by side, it's actually super revealing. On the authoritarian side, both public and private ownership are allowed, and they're aiming simply to protect the ruling elite and just maintain the status quo, uphold the existing societal order. But on the communist side, the state demands strict public ownership. Literally, no private press is allowed, and its goal is to instigate sweeping societal transformation. So both feature incredibly heavy state control, but their actual structures and their motivations are fundamentally different.
However, there is a pretty glaring historical flaw in the Soviet communist system, because the press functions basically as a proponent or cheerleader for the leadership rather than an independent watchdog. There's a severe tendency to just underreport negative occurrences within the regime. A stark, real-world example of this happened when the official communist newspaper, Pravda, completely neglected to report the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. Fearing it would raise questions about Soviet safety standards, Pravda literally delayed reporting the event for 2 full days. They only finally broke the silence when Sweden applied persistent, heavy international pressure.
And that leads us to our final framework, Section 5, Social Responsibility or Freedom with Duty. This right here is a really critical turning point. Let's fast forward to the United States in 1947. World War II had just vividly, tragically demonstrated exactly how unregulated media could be exploited, like when Hitler used national media to incite mass hatred. It became painfully clear that raw, unchecked freedom just wasn't enough anymore. The world needed a modern media compromise. Enter the social responsibility theory. Originating from the Hutchins Commission, which was this big group of academics, politicians, and social leaders, this framework dictates that media retains its editorial freedom, but it absolutely must comply with professional standards and codes of conduct to serve the public interest. It was a direct, calculated reaction to the very real fear that completely unregulated media could be used by socially dominant groups to suppress the less powerful or push hateful propaganda. When you contrast this modern compromise with the older libertarian theory, you see this profound shift in philosophy. While the libertarian model demands raw, unrestricted freedom and remains highly skeptical of the state, social responsibility introduces the idea of self-regulated freedom. It shifts the entire focus from simply having rights to having a moral duty. It really emphasizes internal pluralism, meaning the media owner has a genuine responsibility to present diverse viewpoints and act as a public service, even if that means they might take a hit on their profits.
So what does this actually look like in practice? Well, researchers like Dennis McQuail have pointed out several core principles. Nations attempting this model today, like France, Germany, Japan, and the modern US, expect their media to fulfill very specific obligations to society. They absolutely must adhere to truthfulness, accuracy, and balance. Crucially, they have to engage in rigorous self-regulation within the bounds of the law, refrain from inciting violence or offending minority groups, and consciously reflect the rich diversity of the society they are serving. It's all about balancing that liberty with a very high standard of professional ethics.
So we've traveled all the way from the absolute, iron-fisted control of feudal monarchs, right up to the self-regulated newsrooms of modern democracies. And I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. The next time you open your phone or turn on your television, ask yourself, which of these 4 invisible frameworks is shaping the news feed you're scrolling through today? Are you seeing a watchdog, a propaganda machine, or a self-regulated public servant? I highly encourage you to actively look for that delicate balance of freedom, responsibility, and control in your own daily media consumption. Once you start looking for it, it might just change the way you see the entire world.